At the same time, we are watching closely the veep stakes for Kamala Harris because I do think that who she picks will be quite consequential as a validator for her, potentially to help shore up some of those Midwestern former blue wall states. And one of the top contenders who has emerged is Governor Josh Shapiro. He has come under a lot of scrutiny from people like me and others on the left because, in particular, of some very strident comments he made about student protesters, comparing them to the KKK. I'm going to bring you those comments shortly. But in addition, he also took actions to directly quash protests within the state. He also is, bad on charter schools from our perspective, from a left perspective, and has earned the ire of a lot of unions because of that. He just came out and did this whole thing, I want to slash corporate taxes, so that's also an issue. And, he's taken a number of positions that have caused some problems for him among the young progressive base in the Democratic Party. So there's somewhat of an organized online movement for Kamala to back Tim Walz in particular, but the ire is trained towards Josh Shapiro. So of course, because everything now has to be framed in this way, the real issue that is being alleged here is not about those policy positions or the comments he made comparing protesters to the KKK. No. The Atlantic has decided the real issue is that we're all just anti-Semites because Josh Shapiro happens to be Jewish. Let's put this up on the screen. We have Yair Rosenberg, who wrote a piece for The Atlantic. He tweeted it out by saying, Josh Shapiro called Netanyahu one of the worst leaders of all time, but anti-Israel activists have mobilized against him and him alone being on the Democratic ticket. I wrote about the campaign against Shapiro and the perverse politics of Jewish identity. You can put his piece up on the screen from The Atlantic. He says, anti-Israel partisans have every right to advocate against candidates who oppose their cause, and there's nothing inherently anti-Semitic about doing so. But, as its name implies, the Genocide Josh campaign is not about applying a single standard on Palestine to all VP contenders. It's about applying them to one person who just so happens to be the only Jew on the short list. And to make matters more absurd, Shapiro's positions on Israel don't come close to fitting the epithet. It's become hard to escape the conclusion that some of the activists imposing this inquisition have a problem not just with Israel or Zionism, but with Jews, who they assume are serving a foreign power no matter what they've actually said or done. Okay, a few things. First of all, none of the other candidates on the short list made such provocative, no one else compared us to the KKK. Okay, so let's start there. Number two, J.B. Pritzker was talked about for VP. The left likes J.B. Pritzker. Bernie Sanders is still the reigning icon of the left. Both of these gents happen to be Jewish. So the total dismissal of either the Israel concerns or any of the other policy-focused concerns that the left have is just part and parcel, where it is becoming increasingly the case that someone's Jewish identity can be weaponized to silence any sort of criticism or dissent that you may have on what their actual positions and policy statements have been.
Yeah, exactly, especially when you compare the comments that he made and how vociferous they are. I think we have those comments. Why don't we take a listen?
They have a responsibility to keep students safe. Students shouldn't be blocked from going to campus just because they're Jewish, or learning in a classroom as opposed to being forced online because they're Jewish. It is simply unacceptable. And you know what? We have to query whether or not we would tolerate this if this were people dressed up in KKK outfits or KKK regalia making comments about people who are African-American in our communities. I'm certainly not condoning that, Jake, by any stretch. But I think we have to be careful about setting any kind of double standard here on our campuses. We got to call it out for what it is, and these university leaders have to make sure there is order on their campuses.
Yeah, it is just a classic misnomer to call everything anti-Semitism and to not focus. He didn't even mention it, in the story. It's just all about his identity. This is as good as identity politics gets. It's like you're the one using your Jewish identity to weaponize a legitimate criticism of you, but apparently that's not anti-Semitic. So whatever. This whole stuff, it always drives me crazy.
Last thing I'll say on this is that in that Atlantic article, he makes a point that I think is an interesting point, where he says basically, he could serve as exact the opposite of what you say by being Jewish, using his identity as a shield for the anti-Semitism claims that are already coming at Kamala Harris, Kamala's married to a Jewish man, but Trump says that he's a crappy Jew, I think was the comment, and that you can't believe any Jewish person would vote for Kamala or the Democrats, et cetera, that he could help blunt some of that criticism and create some space for a different policy vis-a-vis Israel that wouldn't be immediately tanked as anti-Semitic. I think that that is actually correct, that if he wanted to serve in that role and capacity, that is a possibility. The problem is that based on the positioning and the rhetoric so far, there's no indication that he would want to serve that role. Kamala herself is very impressionable. Like, no one is under the impression that this person has any sort of her own like ideological core or principles. So that's why if you bring in a vice president who has strongly held views on this issue and is, more ideologically committed in the way that Joe Biden was very ideologically committed, who isn't Jewish, by the way, then that can have an outsized impact on the administration versus if she actually had her own independent views on the issue. So I do think that that's a legitimate point to make, that his identity could end up being an asset, sort of like a Nixon goes to China kind of a deal, that it creates, space, or Bill Clinton ending welfare kind of deal, where it creates the space to blunt those charges of anti-Semitism. I just see no indication that he actually would want to serve in that role, which is why there's such a concern. And, as I mentioned before, the concerns with him go beyond just Gaza also in terms of his policy orientation, promising corporate tax cuts, being very Obama-esque in terms of his commitment to charter schools and voucher programs and those sorts of things, which have earned the ire of teachers unions in the state. And then the other potential issue for him is these allegations about a sexual harassment cover-up among a close aide that were a big deal within the state of Pennsylvania. But Saagar, I think, it looks increasingly likely it's going to be Josh Shapiro.
Yeah, I would bet pretty good money on it. At the same time, I think the confounding variable is the UAW did endorse Kamala Harris just 2 days ago. Yeah. They said that their two candidates are, what was it?
Bashir and Walz.
Andy Bashir unlikely. So it could be Tim Walz, certainly possible. I mean,
don't get my hopes up, Saagar.
I just don't
prepared
think
for defeat.
It takes a genius. It's Philadelphia. It's a swing state. He's a very popular gov. He's more popular than Tim Walz even in his own home state. So.
It's the most likely tipping state.
Yeah.
Tipping point state. He is very popular, and her launch with her VP pick is in Philadelphia.
Is literally in Philadelphia.
So, I mean, either that's like a giant FU to him,
Could
because
be, yeah,
can you imagine picking Tim Walz and in Shapiro's state? But I mean, I guess crazier things have happened. Her aides are promised, it's had nothing to, the schedule was already preset, it had nothing to do with her pick. Maybe, maybe not. We'll see.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.